Good morning, and thank you for joining us today in this very exciting event, the first Global Just Transition Dialogue. Mr. Kant, Dr. Ravi, Luis, Mr. Lavasa, thank you for joining us today. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. Our hope is that we will make the Global Just Transition Dialogue an annual event. Ladies and gentlemen, the IPCC's synthesis report was published a few days back on 20th of March. And interestingly, in IPCC's 4-decade-long history, just transition has figured prominently for the first time in this assessment report. And I believe the reason is that it is now widely recognized that solving climate crisis will need more than technology. It will require technology, of course, but it will also require socio-economic transition. And most importantly, fundamental changes in the political economy. Without these fundamental changes, we will not be able to rapidly deploy technologies that are developing today. Now, we are going to present 2 reports today, and those reports will touch upon some of the issues related to transition, including the kind of policies, plans, and financial requirements that is there to meet the just transition costs in Global South. By the way, we had planned to release 3 reports, but we could manage only 2. And the third, but I will present some of the key findings of the third report in my presentation as well. Now, before I discuss India, let me start by presenting an overview of what is happening worldwide on just transition. If you can start the presentation, please. Now, this is the global map of just transition. There are 16 countries who have policies or plan or both on just transition. And the focus of just transition today is on coal. In fact, there are very few countries who are looking at transition of oil and gas sector. Now, if you put all these countries together, they account for about 25% of global coal consumption. But if you consider the fact that China alone accounts for 50% of coal consumption, India about 12%, then all these countries more or less account for the remaining coal use in the world. So a significant part of the world has developed policies and plans on just transition. Most of them are in global north, but there are countries in the global south, especially Indonesia, South Africa, and Vietnam, who have got into just transition through Just Energy Transition Partnership deal that they have with G7 countries. Now, that was the national picture, but I think the most exciting things are happening at the sub-national level. We could count about 50 plus just transition plans being implemented across the world at the provincial level. Again, the majority is in Europe, as territorial just transition plans being funded through European Commission Just Transition Fund. But there is policies being evolved and framework being implemented in the US, Canada. Of course, South Africa has come out with its own investment plan. So the exciting things are happening at the subnational level. Now, in the report that we are going to present to you today, we have also looked at what are the key learnings from these policies and plans. The first learning that comes out is that everyone is fundamentally looking at closing old mines and plants. That is the first phase of just transition. And then in the second phase, they are looking at closing newer facilities. But the first phase of just transition across the world is to close old mines, old thermal power plants, unprofitable establishments. Most countries have set up independent just transition commission or task force to develop policies. And the interesting part of just transition is that while the discussion happens on labor and skill, the major investments are going in economic diversification and community resilience to build new businesses. So we see from the global experience that just transition is certainly more than investment in labor. It's about economic restructuring as well. As far as labor is concerned, the need for a strong labor and social welfare policies are well recognized. In fact, we have examples of countries who have reformed their labor laws because of just transition. If you look at responsibilities, then there seems to be a clear division between what national governments are doing and what provincial governments are doing. Generally, national governments are responsible for providing the big framework as well as for mobilizing financial resources, whereas development of plan, implementation of plan is the responsibility of subnational governments. Another interesting learning from the global experience is that no country is giving responsibility to existing administrative mechanism to implement just transition. Dedicated systems are being set up at subnational level to implement just transition. And lastly, transition is about dialogue. It is about negotiation. It is about engagement. And that comes out quite clearly from the global experience. Now, this was about policy and plan. What about money? From where is the money coming? And we have studied 6 major coal regions of the world to understand the cost factor and cost component of just transition. We have looked at 2 in Europe, Lusatia in Brandenburg, Germany, Silesia in Poland, Mpumalanga in South Africa, and 3 major coal districts of India, Ramgarh, Angul, and Korba. Now, what comes out is that you can actually distill the cost of just transition into 8 cost components. These are mine reclamation and repurposing. Land is precious, and countries and governments are investing money to reclaim that land and repurpose that land. Decommissioning cost of thermal power plant, labor support and transition, economic diversification, community resilience, green energy investment to compensate for loss of energy infrastructure, revenue substitution, and energy price support. In many fossil fuel regions, industries get subsidized energy that have to be compensated for, and planning and governance. Now, our review shows that while we can come out with some cost factors, the financial packages are a negotiated outcome. There's a deep negotiation that is happening between labor union and national government, between national government and provincial governments. And the investment, therefore, are highly region specific, and rightly so, because no coal region is similar in nature. Now, this was the global overview on what is happening on just transition. But what about India? What can we do in India? What kind of policy and financing mechanism we can set in place for just transition? Do we need to actually start talking about just transition? There's a general belief in this country is that it's too early to discuss just transition. Now, I beg to differ simply because there is no one just transition reality of India. We have divided the coal districts of India into 3 distinct categories. This is category number 1. These are low significance districts. They produce very little coal, they have low productivity, they count for about 5% of the mine. These are 13 districts, coal districts of India, sprinkled across the map of the country. The second category is high significance district. These are high producing, high productivity district. 21 districts, they produce about 80% of India's coal. They account for 1/4 of mines, and they also have 1/4 of thermal power capacity. These are the coal mine thermal power hub of the country. And closure of mines and plants in these districts will have regional impacts. So these districts will need regional just transition plan and not just district plans. But the point here is, in none of these districts, coal mines are closing in next 10 years. We will witness closure happening only after 10 years. So this is the second category, the second reality of coal industry in the country. But this is the third reality, the high priority district. These are the old coal fields of India where coal mining is happening for more than 100 years. Mines are already closing in these districts because of reserve depletion or unprofitability. These are 17 districts producing about 20% of country's coal and lignite. They have 70% mine, more than 60% workforce. They have large fleet of old thermal power plants, and they are already experiencing the impact of closure. Now, these are the districts where we have to start thinking about just transition now. In fact, we should have thought about it a few years back. But nevertheless, these districts are districts where just transition planning should happen now if we do not want large-scale socio-economic disruptions. So this is the new geography of coal district of India. and I think we should be teaching it in classrooms now. These are 51 districts with capacity to produce 1.3 billion ton coal, have 88 gigawatt of thermal capacity, and have 5.26 million formal, informal, and induced workers. These are our calculations which we are going to release today. Now, we have to think about just transition with these realities and two targets that we have. The first target is the net zero target of 2070, but there is another goal which we talk about it, but we are not actually paying a lot of attention about that goal, which is energy independence by 2047. Now, this means that at the 100th year of India's independence, we would like to reduce or absolutely eliminate our dependence on imported fossil fuel. Now, if you take the reality of India and the goals, then this should be the strategy for just transition. Unlike the Western world, which is focusing on phasing down coal first, we should be thinking about all the fossil fuels together. Oil, gas, and coal. We don't have to only focus on coal. Second, but we should learn from them in terms of how they have been successful in planning the transition in phased manner, and we should also follow a phased approach to transition. We have old and unprofitable coal mines, about 50%, 200 plus mines, 30 gigawatt of old power plants, and automobile sector where rapid technological transition is happening right away, right now, and also thanks to Mr. Kant and his work at Niti Aayog. And this is where we will need a lot of work on transitioning and skilling aspect of transition. As far as framework is concerned, we have taken what is there in Constitution of India. And if you look at Constitution of India, then there is very clear division of powers and roles between the state and the union government. Of course, union government has much larger role to play in just transition, but there is specific role for the states as well. In fact, economic growth, industrial development, land and forests are state subjects. So we will need separate framework on just transition at the state level, but as well as at the union level. In fact, the labor aspect of just transition is in concurrent list, which is everything related to socio-economic planning, labor dispute, welfare of labor, social security, insurance, everything is in the concurrent list. Our recommendation for national policy is that we should also set up an independent commission or task force to formulate policy. The national policy and national framework should be about interministerial and interstate coordination, mobilizing national and international finance, transitioning of central public sector enterprise. In fact, one of the big challenge of just transition will be how do we transition and diversify our central public sector enterprises. And then reforms in land, labor, and mining and forestry laws that will be required. State, of course, should also set up a task force, and we have an example of Jharkhand where the first task force has been set up. They should think about developing a comprehensive state and district plan, integrating just transition in their policies and plan, establishing a dedicated institution, because we also think that the current capacity of district administration will not be able to handle it, and then get into negotiation. Just transition is about negotiations. How much it will cost? It will cost us about $900 billion, only in coal and thermal power district. And we are no different. A large majority of that investment will go in economic diversification and building the new infrastructure and industries in coal district. About a third of this will have to come from grant and subsidy and public finance. We can think about $600 billion of private investment, but a third of this will have to come from public finance. And therefore, the key message that we want to give it to you today from our work on just transition is, first of all, there is no contradiction between increasing coal consumption in India and implementing just transition in certain part of the country. We will see increase in coal consumption for the next couple of years. Technological transition, which is happening rapidly, without a planned just transition will lead to suboptimal outcome. And one of the outcomes could be increased poverty and development deficit in coal areas, which are already, by the way, in the list of aspirational districts. These are the poor districts of the country. International partnership will be important to mobilize financial resources And we already have significant resource. I and Mr. Lavasa was talking today about District Mineral Foundation Fund. Every year it collects about $1 billion. And about 60% of these are in coal districts. We also have coal cess, $5 billion every year, which is going for GST compensation cess. So resources, there are enough resources within the country to start implementing just transition. And this is the last message, that just transition is about 6 R's. Restructuring of economy, repurposing of land and infrastructure, reskilling, skilling of workforce and workforce transition, resilient communities, revenue substitution, and responsible social and environmental practices. Thank you very much.